I brought the cart into the great hall of Thornvale myself, which I am told is not done, and I unloaded it in front of 400 people with my hands wrapped in linen because they were not fit to be looked at. Every gift, 14 months of them, piled on the floor of that hall in front of the whole court like a market stall at the end of a bad day. And then I read out the list. I am a smith. Smiths keep lists. What came in, what went out, what it weighed, what it cost. Because a smith who does not keep a list is a smith who is robbed inside a year. I had kept mine for 14 months out of pure spite, and I stood in that hall and read every line of it aloud, in a voice I could not entirely hold steady. It took 9 minutes, and somewhere around the 4th minute I heard the King of Thornvale say, very quietly, from a throne he had come halfway out of, I never sent that. 14 months earlier, I had told that same man to his face that his iron levy was going to close every village forge in the north, and then I had gone home and thought no more about it. My name is Greta, and I am the smith at Marne, not the smith's widow, not the smith's daughter. The smith. My father taught me because he had no sons and no intention of apologizing for it, and when he died I was 23, and I took the forge, and by the time this story starts I was 33, and had been shoeing every horse and mending every plough within 9 miles for a decade. Marne is 400 people, a mill, a church, and my forge. That is the whole of it. Everybody knows everybody's business, and I want you to hold on to that, because it is the hinge this entire story turns on, and nobody at Thornvale understood it for 14 months. The petition was in the spring. The Crown had put a levy on pig iron, the raw stuff, the bar we buy in, to arm the Northern Line, and it had doubled our price in a season. That is survivable for a keep forge with a Crown contract. It is not survivable for a village smith with 40 customers who cannot pay more for a ploughshare than a ploughshare is worth. 9 villages sent a delegation. I went because the others sent their headmen, and their headmen were all farmers. And the only person in that party who could explain the actual arithmetic of a forge was the person who ran one. They gave us 4 minutes. I have never been in a room like that before or since. 400 people and a throne at the end of it, and the King of Thornvale sitting in it, King Stannis, 11 years on that throne, and I had never laid eyes on the man in my life, and had no particular feelings about him one way or another. The headman of Ashby said his piece, badly, and there was a great deal of very polite nodding, and I could feel the whole room preparing to be gracious at us and send us home. So I said mine. Your Grace, with respect, everyone here is doing the arithmetic wrong. You are counting the levy against what a forge earns. Count it against what a forge holds. I carry about 11 bar of iron at a time, and that is my entire capital. I cannot hold more. I have nowhere to keep it, and no coin to buy it. So when the price doubles, I do not earn less. I stop being able to replace stock at all, and in about 9 months I close. And when I close, the 40 families I shoe for stop having a smith within 9 miles. Somebody tried to interrupt me. I did not let them, which I understand is also not done. You will not notice us going, I said. That is the part I have come to say. Forges do not fail loudly. There will simply be a year when the North cannot get a plough mended, and every one of you will wonder why the harvest is short. And not one person in this hall will connect it to a levy signed in the spring by men who have never bought a bar of iron in their lives. And then our 4 minutes were up, and they thanked us very courteously, and we went home. I thought about it for perhaps 2 days. I was quite proud of the holds, not earns line, which I had worked out on the road and delivered rather well. And then a mare threw a shoe, and I forgot the entire business. The first gift came 11 days later, a bolt of silk, blue and very fine, and worth, I found out later, about 9 months of my income, delivered to my forge door by 2 men in good coats, with no name attached to it at all. I stood there holding a bolt of silk in a leather apron with a scold on my forearm, and I thought, Because I knew what this was. Every woman who works alone knows what this is. There is a particular kind of well-off man who sees a woman running a trade without a husband and reads it as a vacancy, and I had been fending off a version of this since I was 24. And this one simply had more money than the others. So I sent it back with a note. I want to be clear that I was perfectly polite in the first one. Sir, I cannot accept this, and I have no use for it. I work in a forge. It would be a light within the hour. Please do not send anything further. G. of Marne. 9 days later, a purse came. Gold, and a great deal of it. Sir, I am returning this untouched. I do not know if you have ever lived in a village of 400 people. If a woman who lives alone is seen receiving gold from a man nobody can name, then by Tuesday everybody in Marne knows exactly what she must have done to get it. You are not being generous. You are being expensive to me. Stop, G. 12 days later he sent a horse. A grey gelding, 4 years old, beautifully made, worth more than my forge and everything in it. I stood in my yard and looked at that animal for a long time, and then I went in and wrote the shortest note of the entire correspondence, which is the one that everybody in the north now knows, and which I did not intend to be funny. I have nowhere to put this. That is all it said. I did not sign it. I was too tired, and I meant it entirely literally, which is the part that still makes me want to put my head in my hands. A horse needs a stable I do not have, and hay I cannot buy, and a farrier, I am the farrier. That is not the point. And a horse standing in a smith's yard eating nothing is a horse that dies slowly in front of 40 families, who will all draw exactly one conclusion about the woman who let it happen. 8 days later, he sent 2 horses. I want to describe my reaction accurately. I went outside, and there were 2 horses, and 2 men in livery holding them, and I stood in my own yard in front of my own forge and said out loud to nobody, "Do you think the problem was quantity?" That went in the note. Most of it did. That note was 4 pages long, and I wrote it at 11 at night with the fire banked, and I did not soften one line of it, and I have since had it read back to me by the man who received it, out loud, twice, with enormous relish, and I have had to leave the room both times. I did not know I was writing to the King of Thornevale. He read every one of them. That is the part I found out much later and have never entirely recovered from. 14 months. Every note. He kept them in the drawer of his own desk in the order they arrived, and, this is the detail Ansel gave me and I have never forgiven him for it, he had begun reading them to people. Not to the court. To Ansel, who was his second and had served him 9 years, at 11 at night, in a study, with a cup of something, in the manner of a man who has found a poem. You have to understand what those notes were doing to him, Ansel told me later. That man has not been told no in 11 years. Not once, not by anybody, and I include myself in that, and I am not proud of it. He rubbed his face. And then a smith in Marne writes to him that he is expensive to her, that his generosity is a cost. Do you know what a king hears his whole life? He hears yes. He has never once in his adult life been handed a bill for his own kindness, and apparently he had started smiling. That was the thing the court noticed, and the court was, Ansel's word, alarmed. King Stannis of Thornevale had a reputation as a man of iron composure and 11 years of a face like a shut door, and somewhere in that autumn he had begun smiling in council for no reason anybody could identify, occasionally in the middle of business, and twice he had been observed doing it while alone. There was, Ansel said, genuine concern about his health. I found out who it was in the 9th month, and I found out because of the 2nd horse. Not the 2-horse business. Later, a mare sent in the autumn, and I had refused so many times by then that I had stopped writing full notes and had begun simply sending things back with the word no on a scrap, which I gather he also kept. But this time I recognised the mare. I shoe every horse within 9 miles. I know feet the way other people know faces, and I had shod that mare 11 weeks earlier at Ashby, and I knew who she was, and she was the property of the Crown's remount station at Ellin. I sat down on my anvil for quite a while. Then I did the arithmetic I should have done in the spring. Silk, gold, 3 horses, and a man who could reach into a Crown remount station and take a mare out of it. And a woman who had stood up in the great hall of Thornevale and told the King of the North he was doing his own arithmetic wrong, and then gone home and never thought about it again. I went to the keep the next morning. I was extremely angry, and I want to be honest that at least a third of that anger was pure humiliation at not having worked it out in the spring. They did not let me in. Obviously, I am a village smith with soot in the creases of my hands and no appointment. I stood at the gate for most of a day, and I was still there at dusk when Ansel came out to see what the noise was about, and I said, "Tell him the woman with nowhere to put a horse would like a word," and I watched a man's entire face change. I got in. They put me in a small room off the west stair and left me in it for about an hour, which I spent standing up, because I had soot in the creases of my hands and there were chairs in there worth more than my forge. I had a speech. I want that on the record. I had been building it since the anvil, and it was extremely good. It had the word contemptible in it twice, and I had got as far as rehearsing the opening under my breath when the door went. He came into that room, and I want to tell you what I actually felt, because it was not what the ballads say, and it was not one word of my speech. I felt no triumph at all. I looked at the King of Thornvale, a big, quiet, tired-looking man who had come in too fast and stopped too far away, and I understood, in one go, that he had no idea what he had done to me. "You're the merchant," I said. "Yes." "You are not a merchant." "No," said King Stannis. "I am not." I did not know yet that almost none of what had been done to me had actually been his doing. If you want to find out what 14 months of gifts were really for, and what a smith's list can prove that a king's own word cannot, stay with me. What I worked out in that room cost me my hands and very nearly my trade, and I would do the whole of it again. "Do you know what you have done to my life?" And he said, and this is the moment I stopped being able to hate him, which was extremely inconvenient, I am beginning to. I have read the notes. I have read them a great many times, and I have understood about a third of what is in them, and I have understood more of it every month, and I have not stopped sending things, and I do not have a defence for that. Then why? Because I did not know how to be refused, he said. That is the whole of it, and it is not an excuse. In 11 years, nobody has declined anything I have offered. When you sent the silk back, my council told me it had been insufficient. When you sent the gold back, they told me the same. Every man in my household understands a refusal as a negotiation, because in this keep that is what a refusal has always been, and I had nothing else to reach for. He looked at his own hands. You wrote to me that I was expensive to you. I have thought about that sentence every day for 9 months. I have never in my life been a cost to anybody. Something in me went very still and very clear. For 14 months I had been writing notes to a man I thought was a nuisance. Sharp ones, blunt ones, 4 pages at 11 at night. But underneath every single one of them, I had been doing the thing a woman alone in a trade learns to do before she is 25, which is to refuse a powerful man politely enough that he does not become an enemy. I had thought I was being fierce. I had been managing him, carefully, expertly, for 14 months, the way you manage a bad customer. And I was done. Sit down, I said. He sat down. The King of Thornevale sat down in his own keep, because a smith told him to, and neither of us remarked on it, and I did not soften one single thing I said for the next hour. I am going to explain about the horses, I said, and you are going to listen to all of it, including the parts that make you feel unwell, because you have cost me 14 months, and I am not going to spend this conversation being tactful at you as well. So the King of Thornevale sat down at a table, and a village smith explained to him, for about an hour, the actual cost of keeping a horse. Hay, stabling, what a beast eats in a winter. What happens to a woman standing in a village of 400 when a gelding worth 9 years of her income appears in her yard from a man with no name? What the priest had begun saying, what 2 of the farmers had stopped bringing me, that my trade had dropped by about 1/3 since the spring, and that I had spent the summer working out whether I would need to leave Marne. He did not interrupt once. At the end of it, he said, "I have been ruining you." Yes, publicly, that is the only way it can be done in a village that size. And King Stannis of Thornevale put his head in his hands, briefly, which is a thing I am told nobody in that Keep had ever seen, and then he looked up and said, "Then I will stop. Today, entirely, and I will send nothing further of any kind. And I would like to be permitted to make one argument first, and then I will accept whatever you say and we will never speak of it again." "Go on." "Your petition was correct," he said. "Holds, not earns. I have thought about that for 14 months as well, and I have not been able to get an honest answer out of a single man in this keep about the iron levy since, and I have begun to suspect I am being managed." He met my eyes. "That is not a courtship. That is crown business, and I would have come to you about it in the spring if I had had the faintest idea how to speak to a person who did not want anything from me. Will you tell me about the iron?" We wrote to each other after that. Properly, both ways, with names on. I want to be accurate about this period, because it is the part I am most sentimental about, and I do not entirely trust myself. He sent nothing, not one thing, not once, for 5 months, and that restraint from a man who had spent 14 months unable to stop is the single most romantic thing anybody has ever done for me, and I did not appreciate it nearly enough at the time. What he sent was questions, pages of them, about iron, mostly, and then about everything else, how a forge is banked overnight, what a bad weld looks like, why Marne's mill takes 1/10 and Ashby's takes 1/12, what 40 families do when the harvest is short. He wrote a terrible hand and spelled like a man who had been taught by 4 different tutors who disliked each other. And I wrote back, at length, in the evenings, with my feet up, and told him he was wrong about things. That was the whole of the courtship. A king of the north being told he was wrong about things by post, twice a week, for 5 months, by a woman with soot under her nails, and I have since had it explained to me, by Ansel, at some length, what that did to that man, and I do not intend to repeat it here, because he would be mortified. His wolf turned up in the 4th month, which I gather was not authorized. I came out at dawn to bank the fire, and there was an animal the size of a pony lying across my forge doorway, with an expression of enormous self-satisfaction, having come 19 miles overnight, and I said, "Absolutely not." And he did not move, and I stepped over him and got on with my work. He stayed 4 days. He was, I will admit, extremely useful. Nothing gets stolen from a yard with that lying in it, and by the 3rd day the 40 families of Marne had stopped asking me about it, and by the 4th 2 children had ridden him, which I am told would have caused a diplomatic incident had anyone at Thornevale found out. Stannis's letter about it was 4 lines long, and I have kept it. He has gone. I did not send him. I have been informed he was seen on the Marne road. I have no control over this animal whatsoever, and I would be grateful if you would not encourage him. I encouraged him enormously. The forge burned in the 5th month. I want to tell this plainly. It went up at about 2 in the morning in the wrong season, with the fire banked properly, the way I have banked it every night for 10 years, and I got out with the mare and my father's hammers, and both my hands went into it, up to the wrist, getting the 2nd lot out. The linen was on them for 11 weeks. I have most of the use back. I do not have all of it, and I never will. And there are 3 things I could do at 33 that I cannot do now, and I have made my peace with 2 of them. And here is what a village of 400 people decided within a day, because a village of 400 people always decides within a day. that the woman who had been receiving gifts from a man nobody could name had burned her own forge for the insurance, or out of carelessness, or out of drink. A smith who burns her own forge is finished. That is not gossip, it is trade. You cannot bring iron to a woman who cannot mind a fire. It is the one thing we are for. Marn did not bring me work again, not one of the 40 families. Not out of cruelty, out of arithmetic, which is worse, and which I understood completely, and which I have never held against a single one of them. I did not write to Stannis about it. He found out anyway, 11 days later, and what he did next is the reason I ended up in that hall with a cart. He came to Marn, not with a column. He rode into that village with Ansel and 4 men, and he came to the burned yard where I was sitting on the anvil. The anvil survives everything, that is rather the point of an anvil, with my hands wrapped, and he got down off his horse and stood in the ash and did not come any closer. I want to say 4 things, he said, and then I want you to tell me to go, if you want to. Say them. 1. I did not do this, and I will prove it. 2. I know that the reason it could be done to you at all is 14 months of my gifts, and that is mine, and I am not going to argue about it. 3. His voice was not steady. 3. I have brought no gift, and I am not going to, and I am aware that a man arriving in a burned yard with a purse would be the single most contemptible thing I could do, and I have thought about doing it the entire way here. And 4. 4. Your list, said the King of Thornvale. Ansel tells me you keep one. Do you still have it? I did. Of course I did. It was in the tin in the cold cellar where a smith keeps her books, and it had not burned, and I had 14 months of every single thing that had ever arrived at my door, what it was, what day, who brought it, and what I judged it to be worth. Because I am a tradeswoman, and I have written down everything that has entered my yard since I was 23. Bring it to the keep, he said, in front of the court. Read it out. Why? Because I have been making a list of my own for 5 months, said Stannis, and I have been going quietly out of my mind, and I need to know whether yours says the same thing. Here is what neither of us had noticed for 14 months, and I have never stopped being annoyed about it, because it was in both our accounts from the very beginning. He sent things quietly. That is what he believed, and it is what he had ordered. No name, no livery, no ceremony, an anonymous gift, discreetly delivered, because he understood at least that much about a woman with a trade and no husband. I received events. 2 men in crown livery announcing a horse in the square at Marn. A bolt of silk carried the length of the village at noon. A purse handed over in front of the mill. We had said it to each other a dozen times, and neither of us had heard it. He said I sent a mare. I said they brought a mare through the village at midday, and made me sign for it in front of the mill. And every single time we both simply carried on, because he had no idea how a village works, and I had no idea that a king's order might arrive at my door, bearing no resemblance to what he had actually said. Everything he sent had gone through the Master of Gifts. Lord Perrin had held that office for 19 years. It is not a grand office. It is a functionary's post, the crown's presence, the seasonal disbursements, the flowers to a widowed countess, and it had been in his family for 3 generations, along with something considerably more valuable, which was the crown's pig iron contract. Every bar of iron the crown bought for the northern line came through Perrin's house. The levy that was closing 40 village forges had made his family the only supplier of consequence in the north, and in the spring a smith from Marn had stood in that hall and told the King of Thorneville that he was doing his arithmetic wrong. Perrin could not silence me. I had already spoken. What he could do, what he had 19 years of office and a monopoly on the king's own generosity to do, was make absolutely certain that when the King of Thornvale next thought about that woman and about her petition, she would be a scandal instead of a witness. He did not have to invent a thing. He only had to take a lonely man's clumsy gifts and deliver them as loudly as possible in a village of 400 people, and let a decade of my standing rot in the open. And when that was no longer enough, when the letters started, and the king began asking questions about iron that his own household could not answer, he burned my forge. The haul took 9 minutes. I read the list. Every line, what arrived, what day, who brought it, in what manner, before how many witnesses. Because I had written all of that down for 14 months, out of nothing but the ordinary habit of a woman who has been robbed before. And at the 4th minute the king came halfway out of his throne and said, I never sent that. There were 11 things on my list that he had never ordered. There were 4 things he had ordered that never arrived at all. And there was not one single item, not one, in 14 months that had reached my door in the quiet, nameless way he had instructed every time. An office of 19 years came apart in about a quarter of an hour, in public, on a discrepancy in 2 lists kept by 2 people who had never once compared them. Perrin did not confess, and never has. There was no need. The household's own dispatch records were in Ansel's hands by nightfall, and they agreed with my tin. He lost the office, the contract, and eventually rather more than that, and I did not attend any of it. Because by then, my hands were the thing I cared about, and there was nothing in that trial that would give them back. The iron levy was repealed in the spring. Not because of the fire, and not because of the romance, because a king who had spent 5 months being told by post that he was wrong about things had finally got hold of a number that was not Perrin's, and had done the arithmetic himself, in his own hand, badly, on a page I still have. Holds, not earns. He wrote it at the top. He had spelled holds wrong. He asked me in the burned yard, in the end, which was correct of him, not in the hall. He had learned, by then, exactly what a public gesture does to a woman in front of 400 people, and I want to give him full credit for that, because it took a fire and 14 months of ruin to teach him, and he never once needed teaching twice. He came back to Marne in the spring, alone, and stood in the ash where the forge had been, and said, I have brought nothing. I want you to notice that. I have been not bringing you things for 11 months now, and it is the hardest work I have ever done. I've noticed. I have 3 things to say, and none of them are gifts. He was standing about 6 feet away, the way he always did. 1. Your forge will be rebuilt whether you ever speak to me again or not, out of the Crown's iron accounts, because it burned as a consequence of a Crown officer protecting a Crown contract, and that is a debt this territory owes you and not a present from me. Ansel has the papers, and they are already signed, and they do not have my name anywhere on them. 2. Your hands. His jaw went tight. I cannot fix them. I have asked 4 physicians, and I have been told the same thing 4 times, and I have made them all say it twice. He took a breath. So 3. Marne has no Smith and 40 families, with 9 miles to travel, and you can no longer do 3 of the things you used to do, and I have been told by Ansel that I am to say this next part exactly as he wrote it, because if I improvise, I will ruin it. He actually produced a piece of paper. He read off it. There is no Smith in the north who can teach what you know. You have said yourself that a village loses a forge and nobody notices for a year. Thornavale will pay you to train smiths, apprentices, from villages chosen by you, and the Crown will fund the forges they go back to. That is not charity, and it is not a courtship. It is the cheapest thing this territory could possibly do, and I have had the numbers checked. Twice. He put the paper away. And I would like to ask you something else, entirely separately, on a different day, when you have had time to decide about the first thing without me standing in your yard. Because I have finally understood what I did wrong for 14 months. And it was not the silk or the gold or the horses. He looked at me. It was that I never once asked you a question I might not like the answer to. I kissed him first, in the ash, with my hands wrapped, in a burned yard in front of nobody at all. It was brief, and it was warm, and it settled something in me that had been braced since I was 24, and first worked out what a certain kind of man means by a gift. 2 years on, there are 9 forges in the north that were not there before, and I trained every one of the smiths in them, and 4 of the 9 are women, which caused a great deal of correspondence that I enjoyed enormously. Marn has a forge again. I do not run it, Belle does, who was my second apprentice and is better than I ever was at fine work, and who will not let me near the fine work, and who is entirely right about that. I do the heavy stuff and the teaching, and I am at the anvil most days, which is all I ever wanted out of a life. My hands are what they are. Cold mornings are bad. I cannot do a scrolled hinge anymore, and I have stopped pretending it does not bother me. And the 40 families brought their work back within the month, every one of them, and not one of them ever apologised, and I have never once wanted them to. They did the arithmetic. It was the correct arithmetic with the information they had. Perrin gave them that information on purpose, and they are not the ones who should be sorry. Stannis still writes to me, from the next room occasionally, which I have asked him to stop doing, and which he will not. He has never given me a gift, not one, in 2 years, not for a name day or a season or anything else, and the entire court finds it baffling and slightly scandalous, and I have never explained it to a single one of them. What he gives me instead is questions, 2 or 3 a week, about iron and mills and tithes and 40 families, and he still spells like a man taught by 4 warring tutors. And I still write back and tell him he is wrong about things. The notes are in the drawer of his desk, all of them, 14 months, in order. He got them out once, early on, to read me the 4-page one about the 2 horses, and I took it off him and put it back and told him that if he ever read that aloud in front of another human being, I would put a hammer through the drawer. He has read it aloud in front of Ansel 11 times. I still wonder about the 40 families, honestly, more than I wonder about Perrin. Perrin was a man protecting a contract, and there is not much mystery in that. But a village I had shod for a decade decided about me in a day, on 1 fire and 9 months of gossip, and every single one of them was doing the sensible thing. Tell me what you would have done in the comments if the woman with the burned forge and the mysterious gifts lived at the end of your lane, and you had a plough to mend. Would you have taken it to her? Comment the list if you want to hear what Stannis's wolf did the first time he was brought into a forge with an actual fire going. And if you want more nights like this one, a king who had never once been handed a bill for his own kindness, a woman who wrote it out for him in 14 months of increasingly blunt post, and 1 tin box in a cold cellar that took down an office of 19 years, stay close. There is more of Thornvale left to tell. Where are you listening from tonight? I would love to know.